Well, I think we got a quorum here. It's 11.
Well, I'm glad to see we have two ladies at least that I can see in the back.
Devorah said she was getting on, but I don't know where she is.
Well, I was hoping this wasn't going to be an all-male forum.
We're here.
Good.
So did you enjoy the reading
all male
this time?
forums tend to disappear over decades.
Well, all female ones do too. You need both.
Males aren't actually necessary for that process anymore, but all male groups would disappear almost immediately.
It's true.
Yeah.
Not
Especially
sure I
with all
follow
the
the
gray
thing.
hair you have in this male cohort today.
Anyway,
By the way, Frank, the response to why are you called ABC is because I'm not XYZ.
well, no, I think, you see, it occurred because I transferred or had someone transfer from an old MacBook to this new one. And they, of course, didn't actually think of my name. So I think the Apple device simply made it up for itself.
But
Anyway,
you
being
can
anonymous.
change it, Frank.
What's that?
You can change it.
Oh,
You
well,
did.
I tried and failed, but I didn't worry about it.
But Bob just now did change it for this Zoom anyway.
No,
All
Richard
right,
did
yes,
for
well,
me.
he did it last time, and that was good.
Yeah.
Anyway, on the subject, I only managed to go to 2 of the links. The TED Talk one was kind of interesting. And I sent to a lady friend of mine that I was going to this thing this morning, and then threw it out to her and said, well, is the resistance of men to women's competence genetic or cultural or both?
And
She
what did
hasn't
she
replied. She hasn't replied, so I'm throwing it out to you.
I think it's cultural.
It's clear that
But-
it's culture. There are cultures where it's set up the other way, and if it was biology, there wouldn't be.
So if men could have children as easily as women, then
Then it would be biological, but it's not.
We're confusing biology with evolution. Evolution includes both biology and culture. So the answer is the aversion is evolutionary, dealing with both the genetic and the cultural evolutionary issues involved, right?
yes, I suppose so, because primitive man had a very tough world to live in.
Unlike now, which is so
Yes.
easy.
Yes, that's right.
You're shaking your head, Norman. Jump in.
No, now it's not so easy, especially when we fail to recognize the beneficial differences between females and males in leadership positions.
Hello,
Because
June.
women
Hello.
do improve organizations.
Hold
Would
on for
you
a second.
say
We got
women-
a couple more people joining.
Wow. Bob, you really stirred up a storm with this one.
I think so. Yes, Susie.
All right.
Michael
Look
Sword.
at this.
That's good. Hello, Susie.
Hi, good morning.
Morning.
Good morning.
Good evening.
To go back to that question of yours, Frank, it's obviously cultural. As socially evolves, social evolution in James' sense, but it's a cultural because matriarchies were very, very prevalent in early stages of civilization until the patriarchies took over. Also, on the evolutionary scale, cooperation has been a driving force for the evolution of man. And that's primarily through the women. So,
Did any of you watch the TED Talk? I forget the name of the woman that gave it.
That was the first one, and she gave us a lot of words about how women should lead smarter rather than whatever it was. But no, she left us with zero techniques for doing that. The other videos provided some information about how women can do this. But what really surprised me is all the intelligent leadership women I know already knew all those answers. They just don't let men know that they know it. So I think part of the problem of men not understanding or appreciating women as leaders is the women's are very good at concealing how really good they are at what they do.
Yeah, but when you were talking leaders, that means you've got to be out front.
Really?
Well, there are different ways to lead.
Well, I
Yeah.
suppose
For me,
I suppose I'm thinking in
there's a
terms-
basic difference, and it has to do with the interconnection of the right and left hemisphere of the brain. Women have a much thicker connection, and thus they have what we call intuition, but also their judgment varies.
So you're saying women have a bigger corpus callosum? I didn't know that. That's interesting.
I have seen
No.
studies that have shown that women do tend to process things in more areas of their brain when they're doing something. So that would go with what
That
Norman
would
had
fit
said.
with what Norman said, yes.
Excuse me. It's not just more areas, it's also different areas than men do. This is an important distinction because because of the different areas of the brain, the subtleties get lost in the male brain. They don't get lost in the female brain.
Oh, you're saying, oh, the subtleties, and that's really interesting because I have noticed that quite often is that a man will say something and it'll just be stated, but a woman kind of listens to the underlying tone, the underlying subtlety, and figures out where that person is coming from.
Yeah,
Dee
it's
Dee,
beautiful.
this is exactly why I've not had other than a female doctor in over 40 years.
Oh, wow.
They listen.
Same here.
They listen,
And I go back
but they listen not only to words, but to, again, the subtlety, the intuition. Where is the person coming from? How is that being said? And I find that being a female, I'm just so used to that. And I find it very interesting when a man can't comprehend that. And, we usually want to say something like, well, why did you say that? Or, I understand that you're saying that because, and quite often they don't get it.
No, they
So
don't get
I
it
just
because
said it.
their
I
brain
just
path,
said it. That's what I mean.
their
Dee Dee, you
brain
mean like
path
the
doesn't
nonverbal
allow them
cues?
to get it.
Joyce, go ahead.
I was just, Dee Dee, you mean the nonverbal cues is what you're saying, is that women read nonverbal cues?
Not only nonverbal, it's almost that intuitive sense that women have. Nonverbal, you can learn to, there's so much written and proved about nonverbal, but there's also, and because I'm a woman, I don't think I can explain it other than, it's an intuition.
Bill?
Yeah,
And I see people shaking their heads.
Yeah, Bill, go ahead.
I was going to say, Dee Dee, I wonder if what you're I agree with you. I'm wondering if what you're mentioning is that women are better at understanding the complete context of communication a lot of times. It's not just nonverbal, it's the history, it's the what's happened in the past, it's a whole bunch of things which I think might be what you're getting at.
And a lot of it is right brain. And as Norman was saying, if there's a better connection between the brain hemispheres, then women have more access to what's going on in the right brain. And the right brain is what sees these overall patterns.
Personally,
June,
I
go
go
ahead.
back to anthropological psychology. When we take us back to the cave days, the women were the community taking care of the children at the cave, cooperating with one another, communicating fine thoughts and emotions. The men were the warriors and the hunters. That's what they're programmed to do.
More hunter
So in
than warrior.
modern life, the warrior is very much in them. And that's how the brain thinks, as a warrior and a hunter. And the women had been forced to stay in the cave and cooperate with one another. There's a woman in Seattle called Dr. Jennifer James, who is an anthropological psychologist. And she has a lot of unanswered questions that she takes back to the cave. That's where our modern psychology evolves from.
There's also a lot of recent studies that indicate that there were a lot of women hunters, so that the cave caregiver business versus warrior may be a misdirection.
Well, it's more ambiguous than either or.
But not ambiguous, more complex. Ambiguous and complex are different words. It may be more complex.
I speak English too, James.
Wait, let him
Well, hold on
continue.
a second. Hold
I
on.
want
Oh,
to
you
hear.
don't speak English, you are English. Anyway, yeah. No, what I'm saying is that I mean, I wrote a book 12, 15 years ago where this very concept of the the cave caregiver versus the warrior, I bought into that, but that's now in doubt, and it'd be nice to hear other thoughts, all of our thoughts about whether maybe there's something even more basic involved here as to why women are better leaders, no question, than men. The answer isn't as simple as I thought it was. And one thing I really liked about this topic is that we're all being asked to rethink it.
June, I'll give you a rebuttal time. You want to say anything in on this topic?
But women in
You know-
high levels of organizations provide better guidance than men.
And why is that, Norman?
Because they listen better.
There is a difference in the formation of the brain, just like there's a difference in formation of the brain between adults and adolescents, which is why we see brilliant adolescents, do amazingly stupid things.
Susie, you wanted to say something. Go ahead.
No, I'm fine. I just
Okay.
got in last night from 3 weeks on vacation. I didn't do the reading, so I'm fine with listening
All right.
for
Well,
now.
I want to give an example. This is just a very personal example, but I was at a lunch meeting with 6 people, 3 women and 3 men, and we were all married couples. I found the conversation of the men much more a one-upmanship well, I did this, and then therefore I did this, and then I did this. And we women were just listening and thinking, you know, you did that 25 years ago. Why are you even talking about that now? And it turns out that after a while, the three women moved over to another section so that we could be talking more about present and, you know, what we were doing today. And I just found it interesting. The men's voices were also very loud. And it was also that, you know, it was also, I hate to say it, but it was that one-upmanship, you know, I did this, therefore I did this. And instead of being impressed, we women were turned off. Now, this is a perfect example that just happened. I also found that of the three men, and I'll point, my husband was one of the three men, and he was far more of the listening mode of the three women. And I just found that interesting that he has a lot of that, what do I want to say, feminine understanding. And I can't, you know, I can't explain it because that's just who he is.
Dee Dee, genetically, there is no fine line between men and women.
Yeah.
Okay, so some men have some of these female characteristics. Some females have more of the male characteristics. For example, Thatcher is a perfect example of
Oh,
the Iron
perfect,
Lady.
Leo.
Iron Lady, the person, the woman who wears the pants because she's got balls. Okay, and then there's
Angela Merkel.
the other side, exactly, the other side of the story where there are women who rule more subtly. They don't have to have the Iron Lady thing. The problem is the women that don't have the Iron Lady genetic variation of humans is that they tend not to last in power very long. Because
I'm sorry, they tend not to what?
Unfortunately, the cannon does wipe out the pen in the short term.
Yeah.
Can I ask you something, James? You were talking about you said there's no, I forget, subtlety in the difference between men and women. Is there any research, for instance, on trans individuals? So someone who at birth is assigned male and then throughout, you know, some point in life is
A lot of that. I wrote an article on this topic 2 years ago. Yes, there's a huge both genetic and cultural chemical cultural pool cauldron where all this stuff gets worked out, and it's the fact that we're having this discussion at this time, this group, with this kind of information that we've been provided with by Bob, it's still not clear. But yes, we're all in a. Each individual is a little bit of the mosaic. The big picture we still don't see yet.
Jim, I'd like to ask you, could you send me the name of that anthropological psychologist and also any of the reference material to me? I'm interested.
Well, her name is Jennifer James of Seattle, Washington.
And James, I'd be interested in seeing the article that you wrote. You said 2 years ago?
2 or 3 years ago, I don't remember.
3 years ago.
I'll dig it up. I'll
I'm
send it
very
to Bob,
interested.
and then I'll send it to Bob, and then anyone who wants a copy can get it from Bob. Is that agreeable, Bob?
Sure, that's fine.
Great.
Because Bob's got all our email addresses. I don't want to start bombarding people with emails that they don't want to get. Only Bob gets that, and Norman, of course. And now Richard.
Yeah, Bill.
One of the people that's done a lot of research in this is the linguist Deborah Tannen. I don't know if you're familiar with her, but she's done a lot of work on this. And one of the points that she made is that boys learn to use conversation to establish status, which ties exactly what you were saying in your observation. And women use conversation to establish connection. And if you've been to a party with women in one room and men in the other room, the conversation of women is usually a little more interesting because they're talking about things instead of about sports and arguing about the statistics or arguing about which car's best or, but I know I'm using generalities, but I think it's her work is very persuasive, and she's written a number of books on that. And I think it ties right into our discussion.
And similar to that vein, Dr. James says that the male communication is very direct and succinct for now. Because in the battlefield or when you're, working side by side, in quarries, I mean, if the saber-toothed tiger was to your left now, you don't have time for the story as women do.
Right.
Women tend to create a story around what we say. And as a modern woman, I can say that a lot of our stories are, as a woman, we feel like we have to explain why we're saying no or yes. It cannot be a simple yes or no, like the men do very succinctly. It says yes because or no because, and we feel like we have to justify ourselves to be accepted. Whereas men don't need the acceptance, is do this now. Here
And
to your left now. This saber-tooth tiger above you now. And because otherwise you'll be dead in the next second. And so in the cave, we have an opportunity to create stories. We're storytellers. We explain why we think something, why we do something. And men simply do not have time for that in their daily work.
June, just to add color to.
Mike's got his hand up, so let's give Mike the floor, then we'll come back to that. Go ahead, Mike.
Thank you, Bob. I've been listening to very interesting conversation, and there's this sort of biological or nature nurture sort of dichotomy that's often referred to. And James, it seems like you have a better grasp than most people, certainly me, than on sort of the biological aspect of it. What I'd like to understand a little bit better is how much does that nature nurture interplay sort of enter into the game. And what I'm thinking about is, obviously some of the rulers throughout history that are women, and some of them have sort of had what I would consider a more approach that we've been talking about that's more connective and more relational. And some of them have seemed to gravitate more to a masculine approach, if we can use that dichotomy. And I wonder if part of the reason for that is there's sort of a sense that they feel they have to do that. Maybe that's even true of corporate leaders that are women. If this is the game that's there, they have to play that game versus, sort of the power game, the toxic masculinity game. So, and there was one of the articles that I thought was really good, that where the author was sort of exploring that relationship. And that's what I'd like to understand more, is how much is it a cultural factor that directs people in certain directions, and how much of it is more biological? We probably never will really know the exact answer, but I think that relationship, that nexus, is really critical to understand. And I wish I understood it better.
Okay, that's absolutely correct. The difference is between watching two different movies, it's the stage. Are you watching Saving Private Ryan, or are you watching The Big Chill? Okay. Are you watching men only in action, or are you watching men and women in action? The reason those two movies are so different is that women have an active role in what's going on in front of you. Whereas in Saving Private Ryan, only men have an active role in what's going on in front of you. And June is absolutely correct. There's a huge difference between how men's brains and women's brains work. My only question is, I don't think we really know why yet. And I'm not convinced about the child thing. I raised my kids, I mean, without much help from their mother. And I feel like I'm reasonably male. So I don't think the child rearing thing is the issue. I think it's how we evolved, why we evolved the way we did. And that's the thing that really fascinates me. Sorry to babble on.
You know, can I say something going back to you know, in the very beginning when we were talking about men were out there in with the swords and the knives killing the animals. And I think it was James who said that women were also in battle against the animals, but I'm going to just guess, and I don't know if I'm right, but I wonder if women were actually the ones setting the traps, that we're not actually using the swords and the knives, but we're in a much more subtle way of trapping the animals. This is just my guess.
Yes, there were different roles played by men and women, and we're beginning to get the anthropological evidence of that. First off, women could run longer and tire less, so they were the ones that chased the animals down. The men were the ones that probably went in and slit
I'm
the
reading
throat.
Humanist
But other than that,
right now.
they were both
Put
involved.
it on.
Yes.
Really good. Put it on.
Well, just by the nature of the male body being stronger and more capable of bringing down the saber-toothed tiger or the dinosaur, it would make sense that the men did the heavier hunting. And my understanding was women were agrarian. We were, you know, the cultivating, the planting, you know, the digging of roots. We were back in the cave, and the men did the bigger hunting. And
Okay.
that in the modern day translates to the bigger paycheck. This is why, you know, women like the men that make the big paycheck, because they're better providers.
Protecting
And
against
instead of
saber-toothed
the bigger
tigers is
tiger,
different from
I've got
hunting
to take
deer.
a phone
And
call.
there weren't any dinosaurs around when men were. Okay, people.
correct, yeah, you're right. So if I forget the dinosaur thing, but you know, the larger animals are probably hunted by the men who had the strength.
But they were
And
hunted.
pardon?
They were hunted after, as James said, the women pursued them and tired them out. One of the big advantages that humans have hunting is that we can run at greater distance than any of the animals. And we used our ability to run to wear the animals out. And as James said, it was likely women who were doing the running. So they were
Okay.
fully involved in the hunting activity.
Richard,
But
I gotta take a phone call.
Susie, what were you saying?
Hold on 1 second. It's Joyce first and then Susie.
Thank you.
So I'm sorry, I'm going to go way back to what I was saying, responding to you, June, because you were saying that women tell stories more for when they say yes or no. They can't just say yes or no. And it's not just that women do that because they want to, it's because there's an expectation that they have to. So for
Correct.
instance, I'm in a committee right now, and there's someone who keeps wanting to take over an entire, you know, there's a conference and keeps wanting to do this and this and this and everything about what this person wants. And I can't just say no. I have to give detailed, lengthy, repetitive explanations for why no is no. And I've seen this over and over in my career. So it's not just that women want to tell stories, it's that no one listens to you if you just say no.
Okay, gracias.
That's very interesting, Joyce, that you have to defend yourself a lot more than just hearing a no. I find that, thank you, I find that very interesting.
And that's why Oprah Winfrey has come up with that phrase of ladies, no is a complete sentence. Learn to just say no. We don't have to explain ourselves.
Exactly.
Has anyone, I just looked up Deborah Tannen. I read her years ago, and I just looked her up. Has anyone read the book, The Argument Culture, Stopping America's War of Words?
No.
No,
Bill
Well,
has.
okay, I'm ordering it right now.
I read,
cool.
I used to teach a communication class, and I was very interested in her work. She's written about 5 or 6 books
Yeah.
about the difference between, men and women argue. But part of it is just that instead of arguing, if I remember that book correctly, it was getting away from constant arguments about things, which we see all the time now, and to finding ways to actually reach agreement with each other. And she's again and she frames it in terms of the differences between men and women. But I think Susie didn't get a chance to say what she was going to say.
Go ahead, Susan.
Okay. All right, thanks. This goes back a little bit to my buddy June's contribution. And some of you know that, a long time ago in the 70s and 80s, I was exporting Indian handcrafts from Latin America. Anyhow, many of the times I was living in the Amazon, and I lived with Amazonian people, and they had a definite separation of what women do and what men do. And it's not that long ago with the saber-toothed tigers. I'm talking, what am I talking? 40 years ago. The men, yes, they would have hunting parties. They would go out. It was only men. And sometimes if a young boy, he was getting initiated, he could be going out. But the women stayed home, and we would go out. I could go with them, and we would get, I don't know, like the papayas. We'd plant things. We'd, if you took up, what's that called? Camote and the things that were root vegetables that were underground. The idea would always be you take what you can, but but you would leave a lot of it there because you wanted to continue growing. And we would have bags that they had made. They would sit around and talk and make all kinds of things that would carry this stuff in it. Also, and then when the men would come back, and sometimes 1 or 2, not when I was there, would be killed. So I'm going to get off on a tangent. They were allowed to have more than one wife, but they had to be in a meeting together and say, is the guy that's going to have another wife and another house strong enough of a hunter to be able to maintain that other person? They were very communal. There was no way to get there except for that's another story. And then I would help them also, like cleaning out the dead animals and taking down to the Rio Napo, the insides, clean the intestines and stuff. Men would never do that. After a hunt, they would get together. There was a type of a pulque, a type of a drink that they would make from coconuts and other things, and spit for getting it fermented. And they would sit and they would drink together. The women would never be able to drink with the men in that sense. There was definite separations, but the women were, like so many of you were saying, they were all community, taking care of the kids, planting things, cooking the meat, doing it. The men were mostly there to procreate and to get the animals. 15 more seconds. The Jesuitas were there too. The Jesuits were in an area apart from there, in a different area. To get there, you had to jog through the bosque, and you'd go with the machetes and cut away, or they would in the front. And then they would get free food as long as they would wear the white T-shirts and such, and cover their breasts, which they didn't do until they got nearby there. The men didn't go, and we'd go back. I couldn't do it well, but they'd carry stuff on their back. There's still today, I'm sure, if they haven't had that land sold for lumber or looking for oil, they're probably still living that way today.
What I'm gathering from the conversation is that the differences, some of the differences in the way that people lead, don't women versus men or men versus women. Men direct, women subtle. Does that seem reasonable or different?
I
Subtle?
didn't understand what you meant by that.
Men are very direct, as June says. There's danger, act. Women are a little more subtle. They look at the nuances and base decisions on that.
Yes, basically.
Well, I think with men, it's power. And with women, typically, they don't have as much power and they need cooperation.
So you would break it
Well,
down.
and regarding that, my thinking around that is that women, because we raise children, think more in terms of a we world. We have to do this for our children and my family. We think in terms of we, where the men think in terms of I. It's very, very self-centered thinking. And look at what's happening with the presidency now. You know, I mean, Kamala always talks about us, we, community, you know, helping all of us, and Trump's in it for himself. You know, it's very clear.
He's an extreme example.
Yeah, he is, but it's quite clear on
Right.
the I world versus the we world, and
Yes.
that's why women would make better political leaders, because we already are instilled in our DNA to consider our children, our world. We don't want to send our sons off to be killed, our children off to be killed in a war. It's us, our community, and we
So let
do
me,
this for all
There
of
are
us.
there are some women who were all in favor of the Vietnam War and World War II and World War I. But you're right. For
Oh
the
yeah,
most
of
part,
course. Well, it's a
for the
male.
most part, those who take care of children effectively are against violence and slaughter. I'm being one of them, who happens to be a guy. So
Yeah, why would you raise a child to send it off to get killed? You know, it doesn't
exactly,
make
it's
sense.
really so. Well, and why would you bother to raise a child if you were in favor of violence? You see, there's a feedback here, a triple or double at least, maybe triple feedback mechanism going here. Those who care about children are going to be less likely to have them killed off. And so there is something to what you and June have been saying about the who's taking care of the babies, but it's not totally male versus female. It's got a lot to do with genes and evolution. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah, I think it's in our DNA, frankly. You know, it goes back to the cave. That really basic thinking is just instilled in our DNA. I don't think we can help it.
so let's see if I can.
And for those of us, Dr. James came to speak to my sales women's group out in Seattle, International Sales Women of the United States. And we, as new women entering the male business world, had to become little men. Instead of wearing, you know, the frilly dresses and looking feminine, we were in suits, you know, buttoned up to our necks to not show anything. We had to fit in with the men. Because the women that wore the low cut, you know, blouses with their suits became floozies and used by the men in corporations. So those of us that wanted success in that life had to mimic the men entering a male business world.
Well,
So-
look at the way look at the way Kamala Harris dresses. You
Yeah,
know,
exactly.
And
always,
Hillary.
She's always in a suit. Yeah,
So let me,
they cannot dress. Well, they can dress as feminine in a suit as they can make a suit, but it has to still fit the male uniform in order to be a uniform world.
so let me ask you this, is the new model on leadership among women, why they might be successful, would they do it based on a communal type of model, a community model, where they try to strive for consensus more than dictatorship or autocratic dictates? Do you think that is a road to success in our new age or not?
Yeah, the only example contrary to that is Miramar. But now that's been overcome.
Say more about that.
Well, is it,
Miramar had a female dictator
Oh, she was
who
great.
just left office and left the country. But
Bangladesh.
normally, female leaders advance countries, advance organizations.
Bill, you had something?
Yeah, I was just going to, it reminded me of Carol Gilligan wrote a book back in the 70s called In a Different Voice. And it's about, one of the examples she used was, you get a bunch of boys on a sports field, and if there's a dispute, they go to the rule book. It doesn't matter who loses and who wins. The rules are the bottom line. But if you have a group of girls that she did in it, and the girls had a dispute, they would rather abandon the game than hurt one another's feelings, and they would figure out a different game to play. And I think she was making the point that exactly that women in the future would come into leadership roles and be better. But I think sort of what's happened is that the women, to be successful, have had to adopt the male standards. And I think that was
Right.
sort of his problem. So I'm not sure it's come true, but that's a really interesting book, In a Different Voice by Carol Gilligan.
Do you think it's changing at all?
I hope so. I was trying to watch Kamala and figure out if that was changing. It seems like it is a little bit, but I guess it'll all depend on whether she can win. If she can win, because a lot of the, you mentioned Thatcher and Golda Meir, and a lot of these successful women leaders have kind of acted in male ways, if that makes sense. But I think in order to really test the question that you asked, Bob, for this discussion is can women be more effective leaders using their own model, using a different model? And I hope so.
Bill, I think you're
I
absolutely,
do too.
I think you're absolutely correct there. And that's my worry is that some of the gifts that women might bring to leadership positions, they get swallowed up by the male culture, not able to be expressed. If they are, they're cut off, they're denigrated, relegated. They can do the same thing as a man can do, and a man gets away with it and a woman doesn't. But the other side of that equation, which I find pretty distressing, is I'm going to call it, for lack of a better term, sort of the Marjorie Taylor Greene phenomenon, where she seems to have emulated Trump, and at least in her district, she can get away with that. And there are a few other people, maybe not so much on the Senate, on the state level, but at least on the district level, that are able to do that. And it's almost like a toxic masculinity that has sort of infected some women, because that model seems to work for them in some respects. But it's kind of a distressing model in my view.
Good point.
Good point.
I just finished a book about Frances Perkins, who's one of my heroes. And it was called Becoming Madam Secretary. And it was excellent. She talked about all of the machinations that went on behind putting the Social Security system into place. Very interesting. I'd recommend it to anyone. But what I noticed so much in the book is how much emphasis she put on her family, and there were a lot of problems with her family, but that she was always being pulled away from the real work in Washington to her family, and she put so much emphasis on that. Whereas I don't think that I don't know if a man writing that same book would have been much more about the logistics and how they went about creating the Social Security system. She was just so aware of her female friends and her family. Very good book. I would recommend it to anybody. Becoming Madam Secretary.
If you don't know about her, she's quite a story.
Frances Perkins, the first Secretary of Labor, and what she bemoans, you know, in the book is that very few women ever got into those positions after her. And it really was Franklin Delano Roosevelt that believed in her so much and pushed her, because she was ready to leave many, many times. But it was his power that kept her there. And
Yeah.
Michael, we haven't
And
heard.
maybe Eleanor had something to do with it too. But in those days, how often would you ever see a man shopping at a supermarket, or knowing the prices of anything, or knowing how much work it was for a mother or a grandmother to be taking care of the kids at home? You know, that was outside their purview.
Michael, you haven't said anything. You have any comments?
This fascinating conversation. I have to think mostly about my wife. My wife recently passed. She was a very, very, very strong woman. And yet most of her strength was in imitating men. That's how she learned to survive, by being more by being more manly than men. So it's very interesting to hear, to try to understand this. What is the difference? What is the difference between? And I'm really enjoying this conversation. Very helpful.
Linda, do you have anything to add at this point? Are you still listening, trying to catch up?
Still listening and trying to catch up. Thank you.
Okay.
Michael, sorry for your loss.
So where are we on this conversation? What did you think of the Pew Report's statistical modeling where women did better than men in almost all the categories except one?
I didn't read it. Can you tell which one it was?
Not without closing my screen and going back into it.
Okay, no, está bien. Sí, nomás. Go ahead.
So that was an open question for you guys.
The Pew reports. I'll look later.
Yeah, Mike, Bill, yeah, go ahead.
One of the articles that I think you added at the end was by Mia Lombard, and she made an interesting point in a conclusion. Her conclusion was that, because the question was, would women make better leaders than men? That she reached a conclusion that having an equal mixture of men and women in a position of leadership might be the best way to set up your leadership in government. And
I thought that was interesting too.
Yeah.
I agree with you.
Yes. Too. Anyway.
I have to commend Hillary Clinton in her speech at the Democratic convention. I mean, she must be somewhat bitter in the outcome in the election. And she came out so strong, and I am very impressed with her.
Were any of you surprised, if you looked at the number of women who were in leadership and heads of the country over the years?
I was impressed with all the women who were at the Democratic convention, who were speaking. I thought, what a difference.
That was
And
good.
the number of women of color.
Go ahead, Norman.
The lack of women in leadership roles adversely impacts organizations and governments.
And households.
It may have helped in a way, Dee Dee, because it showed that, like, hey, we're already here. We're already in power in many places. We're just not being covered. We're not being seen. But it brought it to the forefront that, hey, we shouldn't be afraid of having a female president because it's not really that much of a new thing.
Oh, that's an interesting point.
We've got women in power that are successful and doing well and haven't 100% become men in doing so.
I think that's a
But
really good point, Susie.
having a woman leader would greatly enhance the US government.
Let's hope.
Joyce, you said something.
this
I didn't
point-
hear
And the
you.
world.
Hold
I
on
was
a
just
second.
I was just agreeing with Susie. I hadn't thought about it that way, but I think you're absolutely right. I think that was, you know, you had all these powerful women speaking, and so having Kamala at the end was like one more powerful woman. You know, I mean, it wasn't jarring or shocking or anything.
How many of you watched the Republican convention? Did anybody?
Yeah, I did.
No,
Frank,
Oh,
you had,
I'm sorry I didn't, because what was the proportion of men speaking to women there?
we're not going to go there at this point. Just say that women were in the minority on the speakers. Frank, you had your hand up.
And
Yes,
races, I'm
well,
sure.
this is not meant to be a political question, but I mean, do you think Vice President Harris can succeed and become the president?
Well, we
Considering
certainly
all
hope
the
so.
things we've been talking about, in other words, forget about the politics, but just the dynamics.
Her
What
background
was
and
very interesting, I found, is that she had to find a white male as her vice presidential candidate.
Yeah.
She could not have found another woman or even a black male
Or a gay.
or a
person.
gay. You know, Buttigieg would have been a fabulous.
Yeah, yeah.
But staying away from the political side,
Oh.
just on the question of capability, do you think, I think what Frank is saying, is she capable of being a president? Is she capable of busting the glass ceiling?
Yeah.
I
Does
think so,
anyone
sure.
disagree with that question?
No,
Yes,
more capable than what Trump gave us years ago.
sure.
More capable than Biden would be now, for sure. That was,
Definitely.
um,
So the
Just-
capability question is off the table because
Right.
obviously she is. And whether she gets elected or not is more of a political discussion, which we won't go into.
Well, with the American people as a whole, the whole electorate, could they actually see a woman as their president?
I think so now.
I
I
do.
think,
Now's
Hopefully
the
over
time.
half.
Times are
Frank,
changing.
Can't do it.
Frank, can I
think
ask,
we're-
can I ask Frank a question?
Sure, go
Frank,
ahead.
can you see Kamala as president of the United States? Yes or no?
I would love to see her that. I just think that the
Frank,
electorate
if you
as a
think
whole,
it's possible, it is possible.
it's possible, yes.
remember, Hillary got a lot more votes than Trump. It's only because of the electoral college that she did.
Exactly.
And that's the
Right.
problem. Hey,
Again.
definitely get more votes. I can guarantee it. Well, I can't guarantee it, but I think so.
Well, our hour is coming to an end, so let's go around the room. Last comments. Richard?
Well, I've been interested in this for 50 years. My brother was saying that he was working to support a change of leadership in the world to get more women in power. And so I've been watching this for pretty much my whole adult life. I still think my brother was right.
Joyce?
I think this is a really interesting topic. Thank you, Bob, for that. It provided a lot of good discussion, and I think a diversity of leadership is always a good idea, men and women, but other differences as well. I think we are better off as a society and as groups if we have different points of view leading us.
Bill?
Yeah, I think thank you for the discussion. Thank you for the topic. This has been, for me, one of the more interesting discussions that we've had.
Dee?
I'm just realizing how much of my world was male dominated, and how I've always had to fight for a voice. And
Mhm.
I'm really sorry about that.
Norman?
Dee Dee, it's the same with minorities. I remember decades ago how poorly treated minorities were, and women equally, when women are vastly superior in many roles than men.
Michael?
Thank you.
Again,
Norman.
I thank you, and I've enjoyed the conversation. But I definitely think it's time for a woman to be in the leadership role.
Mike?
Again, thank you for the conversation. And the only thing I can say is I was fortunate enough to marry my wife, who is a statistician, and I can barely get past long division. So that's been a big help for the last 47 years.
James?
Excellent.
James?
I would like to point out that this has been one of the most stimulating conversations of all the Zooms I've had the good fortune to participate in. And I note that possibly that it has to do with the fact that for once, over 50% of the people involved have been women. Let's see if we can keep that statistic vital. Okay? I'd
Here, here.
appreciate it.
Here,
Frank?
here.
They're here. Amen.
Frank?
Well, I couldn't contribute anything really to the discussion. Obviously, I have opinions, but those just center around my own life. But I'm very glad this subject was brought up. And yes, I really hope the United States ends up with Kamala as the president.
June?
I think the US and the world are ready for change. We've had several hundred years of male dominance and oppression. We're all ready for a change, and I hope this is it.
Amen.
Susie?
Here, here.
Here, here.
Because I was up for a funeral and a wedding for 3 weeks and taking care of other people. Now back home, I did not do the reading, so I thank you for the cliff notes on what I should have been studying, and I will look over some of that later. I just, my takeaway, the biggest one is how frustrated I've always been with how white, male, straight, moneyed people seem to run the Western world and do whatever they want, be it in Latin America, Africa, Asia. We're talking about leadership roles in general, and that I have always thought, we're becoming more of a la raza cósmica, the cosmic race. We're mixing together, biologically. I just know that we have to get to the point where there's at least a 50-50. I'm not saying better than, but we need our share of power too, not just women, but people of color, people from poor backgrounds, people throughout the world taking over a little bit more responsibility for the betterment of the whole planet, everything on the
And
planet,
humanists, we
everything
need more
interconnected.
humanists. If we could get 100% humanists running the planet, it wouldn't matter the race, creed, color, national origin, gender, or size, or anything else. If we could get 100% humanists running the government and the world, we'd be in good shape.
Linda?
Well, everybody's said everything already, but in a world where we are voting right-wing governments and the whole planet seems to be pivoting towards that, we definitely need somebody who is much more of a humanitarian, as James just pointed out, a female, color, different points of view, to bring the pendulum back, because it's very scary what's happening, and not just in, but the whole planet is going through this strange shift. And I apologize for being late, but I was unable to connect somehow. Anyway, I'm glad I was able to
Glad
join.
you joined us.
Yes.
Yeah. Glad to see you, Linda.
Yes,
Um,
good to see everybody too, yeah.
As a possible model of a new type of leadership, maybe we should all look towards the former Prime Minister of New Zealand, because she did wonders.
Mhm.
Yes.
Next month, the topic is climate justice. What the heck is it? How does it affect us here in Mexico, in the United States, and globally? And does it have any meaning for us? So
Thank
I will see you all next week. I thank you very much for a very wonderful discussion and the number of people that joined us this time.
Thank you, Bob.
Thank you, Bob.
Great
Thanks,
week.
everyone.
you.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye now.
Bye-bye.